Now, I mostly agree. I don't think it's one of those things where like it's for the reasons you said, but also it reminds me of like with Moses, where he permitted for the Israelites to be able to get divorces and stuff like that. And that was never God's will. It was never something that was legislated from God per se, but it was as a result of the condition of man. And so when we think about mankind and just the depravity of mankind and like how uh sinful man is and how it only seems to get worse, or at least it goes, I won't, a lot of people say it gets worse. The way I look at it is a little different. It goes on a pendulum. I feel like we may go one direction and then back the other to God and then back to something wicked, and it just goes. And usually when we swing to the wicked side of the pendulum, it's much further through the wickedness of it, and then we come back sometimes. And it's like that to me. That's how kind of how I view just looking at history, looking at things. Because I would argue a lot of people say things are the world hasn't been more wicked, or this country hasn't been more wicked. But I'm like, well, I don't know. Maybe the time of slavery was more wicked. Maybe that was more wicked than now. I mean, it depends on who you ask and how you view it. But if you were to ask me, I would say that was more wicked because, in addition to that, there was
Hmm.
also prejudices against other groups like Asians and others too during that time. So I don't know. To me, that seemed more wicked, but that's just me. Um, so all in all, I do think that when we're talking about people who are, like you said, non-believers, I mean, if that were the case, then if we had the ability to say that, then anybody who comes into a position and has a religious, who's zealous over a certain religion, can say, well, things should be legislated based on my faith in Allah or Buddha. Like it gets really murky in that state.
Hmm.
So I'm one that's more of a proponent of similar, like what you were saying. I rather win a person through telling them about God's goodness, telling them about Jesus and what he did for me, and testifying of that, which is what the early church did. They did that, and as well as signs and wonders, because that's what follows believers. Unbelievers, they only have to look to what this world can offer them, what the government can give them, what the state can bring, and what their jobs and the natural things can give. Whereas we have the supernatural that we can rely on and have operating on our behalf. And that's a big difference. Like a lot of people don't realize how big of a deal it is to have the supernatural on our side. And so since we have the supernatural on our side and we can tap into the spirit of God to intercede and present signs and wonders, that's a huge advantage that we have in our ability, at least I believe, in our ability both to reach and witness people, like it talked about throughout the New Testament church, but also it gives us that as kind of an assurance that God is working, that even though we may have morality that is based off scriptures, but the overriding drive of us following that morality is a powerful God. And I think that's just the cool part about having this view versus saying, oh, well, unbelievers shouldn't be able to do X, Y, and Z, or because I believe in this. I think it's very hard currently sits to reach them if we force them to have to follow the Bible. And I always felt like, even as a kid, like where I felt forced. If I wanted to do a certain thing, but my mom said, no, you couldn't do this. And I didn't quite understand it because I hadn't internalized Jesus for myself in that morality of the Bible. That was more troublesome. So I wanted to do the opposite of those things because I didn't understand or internalize God for myself and why this would be harmful for me as a believer. Because I wasn't a believer then, but I was forced to be a believer because I grew up in a Christian household. So I don't know. I mean, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, and I want to present scripture here because it's so tight with God, at times. Like, and to your point about the pendulum, I think there are a few scriptures that come to mind. The scripture says, My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge." That's one. And then I get to thinking of stories where when there weren't enough non-believers, how God was just willing to say, "Look, y'all got to go," And so I think that. generations have been taken out because or not generations possibly, but people have been, nations have been taken out because of their non-belief. And so it gets tight, you know, like I do, but that's why I preach what I preach, in saying that, you know, I hate that people um you know, think that, you
Hmm.
know, politics is the answer,
Right.
because I think that God governed could potentially be the best answer. And I think it is the best answer for all of our, you know, issues. And so I think that to a certain extent, where we have evolved as a country, I think that there will be judgment if things aren't done according to his will and to his ways. And what our word shares about that is, you know, doing it in his way, you know, walking in his statutes, walking in his will and his way. So I mean, it's tight, it's tight. But
Hmm.
for what it is, I'm just gonna go out there and say, should non-believers be held to the Bible? No, they don't believe. But if they want to find a better way, you know, I'm trying to reach them by any means necessary, and trying to
Yeah.
get them to know about the Spirit of God. So that's our thoughts on that topic.